They pushed out a single mom and an autistic man like they were problems to be hidden, not people to be helped, until he made one quiet move that silenced the room and exposed what kindness looks like when no one important is watching. If dignity costs you comfort, do you still choose it? Marisol stepped into the downtown Chicago hotel, as if the revolving door might change its mind and spit her back onto the sidewalk. The lobby smelled like citrus and money, all polished stone and quiet shoes, the kind of place where even laughter sounded rehearsed. She adjusted her thrift store coat, felt the heat rise in her neck, and kept her chin up anyway. In her arms, her toddler shifted, heavy with sleep and trust, unaware of the rules this room expected people to follow. She had reread the cream-colored invitation so many times the paper had softened at the folds. It wasn't addressed to a +1, or a guest, or a beneficiary. It carried her name like it belonged there, printed cleanly in black ink. That detail should have calmed her, but it did the opposite. If the paper was real, then the risk was real too, because a mistake tonight could travel fast to the wrong desk, the wrong file. At the reception desk, a woman with a headset glanced at Marisol's bag first, then her shoes, then the child. The smile she offered was practiced and thin, the kind that made Marisol feel as if she had already apologized just by existing. Marisol didn't give her a chance to speak. She asked where the family services banquet was, keeping her voice steady, as if steadiness could be worn like armor. The woman's eyes flicked toward the ballroom doors and back, measuring. Marisol followed the signs anyway, past framed photos of donors shaking hands, past a wall of flowers that looked too perfect to be alive. Every step brought a memory she didn't invite. A courthouse hallway, fluorescent lights, a caseworker's face that never softened, the sentence that still echoed in her sleep, "Stability is what matters." Stability meant money. Stability meant no scenes. Stability meant never being the woman people whispered about while they pretended not to stare. The ballroom entrance opened into a sea of suits and shimmering dresses, a soft roar of conversation held just below true joy. Servers moved like they were trained not to disturb important air. Marisol felt her shoulders tighten, her body bracing for impact that hadn't happened yet. She hovered near the edge, searching for a friendly face, but all she found were quick glances that slid away. Somewhere inside her chest, hope and dread sat side by side, holding hands. Her toddler stirred and made a small sound, not a cry, just a question. Marisol bounced him gently and whispered, "It's okay, baby," like she could convince both of them at once. She scanned the name tags on nearby guests, wondering if any of them had ever stood before a judge, and felt their entire life reduced to a checklist. People talked about giving back, about values, about community, and Marisol's mind kept translating it into one private fear. What if none of this was meant for her? Near the wall, half hidden behind a tall plant, a man stood alone, as if he had been placed there and forgotten. He looked about mid-30s, clean-shaven, hands clasped and unclasped in a rhythm that wasn't for anyone else. His eyes didn't settle on faces. They traced corners, exits, patterns in the carpet. When a burst of laughter flared nearby, his shoulders jumped as though sound had teeth. Marisol recognized the look, not from books, but from the way people judged without asking. A woman in a silver dress leaned toward her friend and murmured something with a small smirk. Marisol didn't hear the words, but she saw the friend's expression change, pity first, then discomfort, then that strange superiority people wore when they were relieved it wasn't them. The man's fingers pressed harder into his palm, like he was trying to hold himself together from the inside. Marisol's instinct was to look away, to protect herself by staying invisible. But something in her refused. She shifted her toddler higher and took a step closer to the wall, not toward the crowd, but toward the quiet man. He didn't notice at first, or maybe he did and didn't know what to do with it. His jaw tightened as if he were counting seconds until he could leave without being rude. Marisol felt the urge to say something simple. "Hello, you're not alone." But her throat locked because she knew how kindness could backfire in rooms like this. Then, as if the air itself changed, a sharply dressed event organizer appeared in Marisol's path. The organizer's posture was bright and open, but her eyes were flat, already prepared for refusal. "Excuse me," she said softly, leaning in just enough to make it intimate. "Can I help you find where you're supposed to be?" The words sounded helpful. The tone sounded warm. But Marisol's nervous system heard something else. "You don't belong." Marisol pulled the invitation from her pocket too fast, almost tearing it. She held it out with fingers that betrayed her, trembling just enough to be seen. The organizer took it, read it, and paused for a fraction of a second that felt like a verdict. Over the organizer's shoulder, Marisol saw the quiet man glance over, his gaze quick like a startled bird's. The organizer's smile stayed in place, but it sharpened at the corners, and she lowered her voice to a whisper that landed like a bruise. "This is a private event, so if you were in Marisol's place, would you stay and fight the shame, or would you turn around and leave before they could push you out? Place your answer here below in the comments, because what happens next depends on what kind of person you believe she is." Marisol blinked as if she could clear the sentence from the air. The organizer still held the invitation, thumb resting on her name like a lid being pressed down. Around them, the room kept smiling, kept clinking glasses, kept pretending it didn't see a woman being quietly erased. Marisol felt her pulse in her ears, loud enough to drown out the music. She tightened her grip on her toddler, forcing her face into something calm. "I'm on the list," she said, and hated how small it sounded. The organizer's eyes slid past her to the child, then to the diaper bag, then to the scuffed edge of Marisol's sleeve. That quick scan carried a message older than words. This room had standards, and Marisol looked like a problem. The organizer leaned closer, so close the perfume turned sharp. "This banquet is for partners and donors," she whispered. Marisol's stomach dropped, not from surprise, but recognition. She knew this tone from the clinic waiting room, from the daycare that suddenly had no openings, from the landlord who found a reason to raise rent right after seeing her son. It was rejection dressed as policy, cruelty padded with manners. Her mind raced ahead to consequences the way anxious brains do, stitching worst-case futures in seconds. One scene, one complaint, one note in a file. Her toddler shifted again, sensing her tension, and a soft whimper escaped him. Marisol bounced him, but the motion felt frantic. The organizer's smile widened by a millimeter, as if the sound proved her point. "We can direct you to the lobby," she continued, still whispering, still kind on the surface. "There's a nice seating area near the elevators. You'll be more comfortable there." Comfortable, like a polite word for removed. Marisol glanced toward the doors, measuring the distance like it mattered. She imagined stepping out, breathing, telling herself she didn't need this, but the invitation had promised something she couldn't replace. A contact, a meeting, a chance to prove stability in a world that counted stability in bank statements. She remembered the caseworker's tone from months ago, gentle, firm, devastating. "You have to show consistent support. People are watching, Marisol." Tonight felt like watching in real time. The organizer finally returned the invitation, but not before folding it once, slowly, as if demonstrating how easily a person could be folded too. "We don't want misunderstandings," she said. "These guests paid to be here." The word paid hit Marisol in a place that still ached from overdraft fees and late notices. She swallowed and nodded, not because she agreed, but because her body had learned that nodding sometimes shortened the harm. Behind the organizer, the quiet man by the wall went very still. His hands stopped their rhythm, fingers hovering in mid-air like he'd lost the next count. his gaze fixed on Marisol, then on the organizer's mouth, as if he were reading the shape of the words he couldn't bear to hear. He looked away quickly, but the motion wasn't dismissal. It was restraint. Marisol felt a strange, unwanted comfort in that. Someone else understood the feeling of being cornered by a nice voice. A laugh erupted from a nearby table, loud and careless, and Eli flinched hard enough that a woman turned and frowned. Someone muttered, "Is he okay?" Not with concern, but with irritation, like a malfunctioning device in a luxury store. Eli's shoulders rose and fell too fast. He focused on a pattern in the carpet, tracing it with his eyes as if it were a map out of the room. Marisol noticed the small earplugs looped around his keychain, unused but ready, like an emergency rope. Marisol took a half step back, and her heel bumped a chair leg. The scrape was tiny, but it snapped attention toward her. The organizer's expression changed, less whisper, more control. "Ma'am," she said, louder now, "I need you to come with me." A few heads turned, then turned away, the way people do when they don't want to be asked to choose sides. Marisol felt her face burn. The toddler's whimper turned into a thin cry. She tried a different tactic, the one she used with doctors and judges. Facts. "I was told to bring my son," she said. "I was told someone here could help me." The organizer's eyes narrowed, just enough to show the mask underneath. "Who told you that?" she asked, voice sweet like a trap. Marisol hesitated. She couldn't say the name yet, not because she didn't have one, but because saying it felt like lighting a match in a room full of gas. Eli shifted closer, without fully stepping forward, like a tide that hadn't decided if it would break. His lips parted, as if he might speak, then pressed together again. It looked like a battle happening behind his eyes. The urge to intervene versus the fear of becoming the center of a room that already felt like a storm. His right hand dipped toward his pocket and stopped, hovering there. Marisol noticed how carefully he moved, like one wrong motion could shatter something fragile inside him. The organizer extended her hand, palm up, waiting for Marisol to surrender to her guidance. Marisol's body reacted before her mind did. She took a step, not because she wanted to leave, but because she couldn't bear the stares landing on her child. The toddler reached outward, fingers opening, searching for anything familiar. And in that small, instinctive reach, his hand stretched toward Eli, toward the quiet man who hadn't looked away like the others. Eli froze, but he didn't retreat. His eyes flicked to the child's face, and something softened there. Recognition, maybe, or a memory he didn't want to carry in public. The toddler's crying thinned into a confused sniffle, like he sensed calm nearby. Marisol held her breath, caught between embarrassment and sudden hope. The organizer noticed too, and her mouth tightened. "Sir," she said sharply, "please don't engage." Eli's fingers finally closed around something inside his pocket, and his shoulders lifted with a careful inhale. He looked at Marisol as if asking permission without words, as if he knew the cost of help in a room like this. The organizer angled her body to block him, but Eli's hand came out anyway, slow, controlled, revealing not his phone, not a wallet, but a small object that didn't belong in a gala, something oddly simple that made Marisol's chest tighten with questions she couldn't yet name. The object in Eli's hand was a small matte blue fidget cube, edges softened from use, nothing glamorous, nothing impressive. Yet the way he held it, like a fragile promise, made it feel significant. Marisol watched his thumb press one of the silent buttons in a steady rhythm. The toddler's eyes locked onto it as if the cube were a lighthouse. His crying broke into hiccuped breaths, confusion loosening its grip. In a room full of loud elegance, that quiet toy felt like mercy. Eli didn't smile. He didn't perform kindness for approval. He simply offered the cube within the toddler's reach, keeping his hand still, giving the child control. The toddler leaned forward and touched it with 2 fingers, then a whole hand, mesmerized by the tiny, clickless motion. Marisol felt her own body unclench by degrees, as if her nervous system had been holding a heavy door shut. It startled her how quickly safety could enter through something so small. The organizer's gaze snapped to the cube, then to Eli's face, as if trying to categorize him. Her tone sharpened. "Sir, this is not appropriate," she said, louder now, so nearby guests could hear and silently agree. "We need to keep the space orderly." Orderly. Marisol heard what it really meant. Not messy, not poor, not unpredictable, not human in ways money couldn't manage. Eli's jaw tightened, but he kept his hand steady. A couple at the nearest table turned with polite curiosity that quickly curdled into judgment. The man's eyes lingered on Marisol's diaper bag. The woman's mouth pinched as if she'd tasted something bitter. "Is that a child?" she whispered to no one, as if children were a breach of contract. Another guest chuckled softly, the kind of laugh meant to bond people through shared disdain. Marisol felt it slice through her, hot and quiet. She wanted to disappear and wanted to scream, both at once. Her toddler gripped the cube and, for the first time since they entered, made a sound that wasn't distress, an absorbed little hum. Marisol's throat tightened with relief so sudden it almost hurt. She looked at Eli and saw sweat at his hairline, like this simple act cost him more than anyone understood. His eyes stayed on the child, not the room, not the organizer. It wasn't bravery as performance. It was focus, the kind that comes from surviving a lifetime of too much. "Please," Marisol whispered, not sure who she was pleading with. The organizer angled her body closer to Marisol, lowering her voice again, intimate and cruel. "If you can't keep your situation under control," she murmured, "it will reflect poorly on you." The words, "your situation," wrapped around Marisol like a leash. She imagined the caseworker's pen scratching. She imagined a headline that didn't need to be true to do damage. Shame surged up, fast, chemical, flooding her senses. Eli's breathing shifted, shallow and quick, as if the room had grown smaller. He glanced toward the ceiling lights and then toward the exit, calculations happening behind his eyes. Marisol recognized that look too. Someone managing their own edges, trying not to fall apart in front of strangers who would call it a spectacle. The organizer's voice kept pressing, "We can't have disruptions." The word disruptions landed on Eli like a hand on a bruise. A server passed by with a tray of champagne flutes. One guest took a glass and laughed, saying, "You can't bring everyone in off the street." The line was soft, almost playful, and that was what made it vicious. People nearby smiled, grateful someone else said what they were thinking. Marisol's face went numb, the way it does when the brain tries to protect itself by turning down the volume on pain. Her toddler, unaware, pressed the cube's slider back and forth, calm, returning in waves. Eli finally looked up, and for a heartbeat, his gaze met the guest's. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, a measured awareness, like he was logging a fact for later. Then his eyes flicked to the organizer's badge, reading her name, her title, the logo beneath it. His fingers pressed the cube twice, then stopped. Marisol noticed his other hand was clenched so tightly his knuckles blanched. He swallowed, and the movement looked like it hurt. The organizer took one step closer and reached toward the toddler, not to help, but to take the cube away, to end the oddness before it spread. Marisol's protective instinct flared. She turned her shoulder, blocking gently, a mother's body becoming a shield without thought. "Don't!" Marisol said, louder than she intended. Her voice cracked, but it was real, and it cut through the artificial niceness like a tear in fabric. A few heads turned again, hungry for a scene. Eli flinched at the sudden attention, and his eyes darted to the faces now watching. His breathing sped up. Marisol saw the moment his internal balance wavered, the moment the room's noise became physical pressure. He reached into his pocket with a jerky motion, as if searching for an anchor. The organizer saw it and stiffened, misreading the movement as threat rather than coping. "Sir!" she snapped. "Hands where I can see them." Eli froze, shoulders raised, chest tight, like his body had been caught between commands. Marisol wanted to explain, to translate, to tell them he wasn't dangerous. He was overwhelmed, but she knew how people heard explanations as excuses. The toddler looked up at Eli with wide, trusting eyes, cube clutched in his fist. That trust seemed to steady Eli for half a second. He exhaled slowly, then reached into his pocket again, this time deliberately, as if choosing control over chaos. When his hand emerged, it wasn't another toy. It was a slim, off-white envelope, edges worn, sealed, but not pristine, like it had been carried through too many moments of hesitation. Eli held it flat on his palm, showing it to no one and everyone. The organizer's eyes flicked to it and then away, uneasy for reasons Marisol couldn't place. Eli's lips parted as if he was about to speak, but the words didn't come yet. The room leaned in without realizing it. Marisol stared at the envelope and felt a strange chill crawl up her arms. It looked ordinary, but it carried the weight of a decision delayed too long. She wondered who Eli was to bring something like that into a place like this, and why he'd waited until now to show it. The organizer lifted her chin, preparing to regain control with a louder voice, a firmer smile, maybe even security. Eli's fingers tightened around the envelope, and his gaze fixed on the organizer's badge again, as if the name mattered more than anyone understood. Eli finally spoke, quiet enough that only the closest people could hear, but sharp enough to slice through the air. "Before you ask me to leave," he said, voice steady in a way that didn't match his trembling hands, "you should know what this envelope is." The organizer's smile faltered for the first time, a crack too fast to hide. Marisol felt her heart kick hard, because whatever was inside didn't feel like a complaint or an apology. It felt like leverage. The organizer recovered fast, like someone trained to keep power even when surprised. She let out a soft laugh that didn't match her eyes. "Sir, whatever you're holding, this isn't the place," she said, voice pitched for nearby ears to hear reason and not fear. She held her palm out again, this time toward Eli, a gesture that looked calm, but carried command. Marisol noticed how the guests relaxed when the organizer took charge, as if cruelty felt safer when it wore authority. Eli didn't give her the envelope. He kept it close to his chest, not defensive, more like protective. His gaze flicked from the organizer's badge to the printed banner behind her, an elegant logo for the foundation hosting the banquet. Something in his face tightened, then settled, the way a person looks when they've finally stopped bargaining with themselves. Marisol felt the room's attention shifting, not loud, but turning like a flock. People sensed there was more here than a misunderstanding. Marisol's toddler tugged at her collar, sleepy again, the cube still clenched like a treasure. She kissed his hair, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and the faint city air trapped in his curls. That smell grounded her, pulled her away from panic long enough to think. She couldn't afford a scandal. She couldn't afford to be labeled difficult. Yet watching the organizer speak to Eli like he was a problem to be managed made Marisol's stomach twist with a different fear. The fear of staying quiet and teaching her son that silence is survival. The organizer turned back to Marisol with a pitying look that stung worse than anger. "Mom," she said, "we can't accommodate this." She gestured lightly at the toddler, the diaper bag, the whole messy reality of a human life. "There's a family lounge downstairs." Family lounge. Marisol almost laughed because the hotel didn't have one. The organizer was improvising a polite exile. It was amazing how easily people invented places for you to disappear into. A man at a nearby table leaned back and murmured, Some people will do anything for a free meal. The words were casual, meant to be harmless, but Marisol's brain heard the deeper message. She was a threat to fairness, a parasite, a story they could tell to feel righteous. Heat flooded her face. She remembered standing in a grocery line with food stamps years ago, the woman behind her sighing loudly, the cashier avoiding her eyes. Different room, same judgment, same lesson. Eli's fingers tapped the envelope once, then stopped, as if he was keeping time with a song only he could hear. He stared at the man who'd spoken, not challenging, simply observing. The man looked away first. That small shift didn't fix anything, but it changed the air. Marisol watched Eli and realized he wasn't only enduring, he was deciding, and there was something unsettling about how calm he seemed right before he spoke again, like a storm that hasn't moved yet, but will. "Please," the organizer said, her patience thinning at the edges. "We have donors arriving. I need you both to cooperate." Donors. The word hung like a shield. Marisol saw how guests straightened at it, as if money were a sacred object that could be harmed by proximity to pain. The irony burned. The event's speeches would praise compassion, yet compassion itself was being escorted out. Marisol's chest tightened with the kind of sadness that turns into anger if it has nowhere to go. Eli finally answered, and his voice was low, careful, as though he measured every syllable to keep it from cutting too deep. "They don't like surprises," he said, not to the organizer, but almost to himself. The organizer frowned. "Excuse me?" Eli didn't repeat it. He looked down at Marisol's invitation, still folded, still creased by the organizer's hand. "That paper is correct," he added. "She is supposed to be here." His certainty made the organizer's eyes flash, because certainty from someone like him felt like rebellion. Marisol's heart jumped. She didn't understand how Eli could know that. She hadn't told him anything. She hadn't even said her last name. Yet he spoke as if he'd read a chapter she was still living. Her mind searched for explanations, hungry for closure. Was he staff? Was he connected to the foundation, or was he simply defending her out of principle? The uncertainty pulled her in, tightening the curiosity like a knot. She found herself waiting for the next piece the way people wait for a withheld truth. The organizer's smile returned, but it looked forced now, stretched too thin over something sharp. "Sir," she said, "I'm responsible for the guest experience. If you continue interfering, I will call hotel security." The word security made Marisol's stomach drop. Security didn't ask questions. Security moved bodies. Security created incidents that lived forever on someone's phone. Marisol imagined a clip online. "Single mum escorted out." She could hear the comments already, cruel and confident. Eli's eyes flicked toward the corners of the room again, not in fear this time, but in calculation. Marisol noticed something new, a small pin on his jacket, subtle, almost hidden, with the same logo as the foundation banner. It wasn't a guest sticker. It looked official. Her skin prickled. The organizer saw Marisol's gaze follow it and shifted to block the view, too quickly, too protective. That reaction answered a question Marisol hadn't even fully formed. The organizer recognized Eli, and she didn't want anyone else to. Marisol took a slow breath and tried to steady herself. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered to Eli, not demanding, just trying to understand. Eli didn't look at her right away. When he finally did, his expression was careful, as if honesty could overwhelm him the way noise did. "Because this place says it helps families," he said quietly, "and then it punishes the ones who show up." The words landed in Marisol's chest like a hand squeezing her heart. Simple, true, unbearable. The organizer's phone buzzed in her palm, and she glanced at the screen. Marisol saw the color drain from her face in a way that didn't match a normal text. The organizer's eyes snapped up to Eli, then to the ballroom doors, then back again, as if she'd been warned about something arriving. She tucked the phone away fast, but not before Marisol caught a fragment of the notification banner, a name followed by 2 words, "Arrived early." The organizer's voice softened into urgency. "We have to handle this," she said under her breath. Eli's grip on the envelope tightened. He seemed to brace, shoulders squaring like he was preparing to step into a role he hated. Marisol felt the room tilt toward a moment that would decide more than a seat at a banquet. Her toddler, half asleep, pressed the cube against Eli's knuckles as if sealing a tiny alliance. Eli glanced down at the child, then back up at the organizer and said, "If the person who arrived early sees what you're doing right now." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The organizer's eyes darted toward the ballroom entrance again, and for a moment her confidence slipped, showing something raw underneath, fear of being seen. Marisol followed the glance and saw only a stream of guests, coats being taken, smiles being exchanged like currency. Yet the air felt charged, like thunder before rain. Eli kept his voice quiet, but each word landed with weight. "You're treating her like a stain," he said, "and stains spread when people pretend they don't exist." Marisol's throat tightened, not just from gratitude but from the danger of it. Being defended in public sounded noble in movies, but in real life it could cost everything. She pictured the caseworker again, the tidy office, the calm questions that were really traps. How do you handle conflict? Do you create unstable situations? If someone filmed this, Marisol could lose more than dignity. She could lose her son. That fear didn't shout, it whispered, and whispers were harder to fight. The toddler shifted in her arms, heavy with warmth, and Marisol adjusted him carefully. His small fingers still held the blue cube, now like a secret comfort. Eli watched the child with an intensity that looked like restraint, as if he wanted to do more, but didn't trust himself in a room full of eyes. He swallowed and pressed his thumb against the envelope again, grounding himself the way some people count breaths. Marisol realized he was holding 2 battles at once, the room's cruelty and his own overload. The organizer's tone turned syrupy, dangerous in its sweetness. "Sir," she said, "I understand you're trying to help, but you're escalating." Escalating. The word was a trap designed to make the victim responsible for the harm. Marisol felt it hook into her ribs. She'd heard it from an ex who broke things and then accused her of being too emotional. She'd heard it from a supervisor who smiled while cutting her hours. The brain learns patterns fast. Her body prepared for blame before it arrived. A tall man in a charcoal suit approached, drawn by the subtle tension like a predator sensing weakness. He didn't look at Marisol's face. He looked at her bag, then at Eli's envelope. "Everything all right here?" he asked, with the casual authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. The organizer's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if reinforcement had arrived. "Just a small confusion," she said, laugh returning. "We're resolving it." Eli's gaze flicked to the man's watch, expensive and bright under the lights. Then his eyes dropped to the man's name tag, and something in Eli's expression tightened, as if that name carried a memory he didn't want. Marisol couldn't hear the thoughts, but she could feel the shift. Eli went still in a way that wasn't fear. It was focus. The man extended a hand toward Eli, palm open. "Let's keep things smooth tonight," he said, voice friendly, edges sharp. Marisol's heart hammered. Smooth meant quiet. Smooth meant invisible. Smooth meant the kind of silence that keeps powerful people comfortable while smaller people swallow their humiliation like medicine. She wanted to say, "He's not doing anything wrong," but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. Her toddler stirred and let out a soft, tired sound, and the man's eyes narrowed as if the child's existence was a nuisance. "Children don't belong on this floor," he said, still smiling. The sentence landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. Marisol felt a flash of anger so bright it scared her, because anger could make her careless. She pressed her lips together until they almost hurt. Eli's breathing changed, faster now, and he shifted his weight as if the carpet had become unstable. He didn't look at the man. He looked at the ceiling lights again, then at the exit, then at Marisol's son. His nervous system was counting threats, and the room was full of them. The organizer leaned in close to Marisol, voice low enough to be private, cruel enough to feel intimate. "If you make this difficult," she murmured, "people will remember you, and not in a good way." Marisol's stomach turned. The phrase "people will remember you" sounded like a promise of social punishment, the kind that follows a woman into job interviews and custody hearings. It was corporate sabotage without a paper trail, reputations sliced thinly and served with a smile. Eli heard enough to flinch. He lifted his head, and for the first time Marisol saw anger flicker through his control, not loud, not dramatic, but razor-precise. He took one step forward, then stopped, as if he was choosing his next move like a chess player who hated the game. "You're threatening her," he said simply. The man in the suit chuckled. "No one is threatening anyone," he replied. "We're maintaining standards." Standards. Marisol almost laughed again, because standards seemed to apply only downward. A drunk donor could stumble and be having fun, but a tired mother was a problem. A wealthy guest could be rude and be direct, but an autistic man reacting to noise was disruptive. Her mind spun with the unfairness until it felt dizzying. She held her son tighter, feeling his heartbeat against her own, two hearts trying to stay steady in a room that wanted them unsteady. Eli's fingers slid under the envelope seal, not ripping it, just testing it, as if he'd been waiting for the exact right second. The organizer noticed and stiffened. "Don't!" she hissed, and the word finally dropped the mask. Marisol caught it. The moment the organizer revealed the truth, she wasn't protecting the event. She was protecting herself. Eli's eyes met hers briefly, and in that glance, Marisol felt an unspoken question. "Are you ready for what this will trigger?" Before anyone could stop him, Eli placed the envelope on the nearest white tablecloth. The contrast made it look even more out of place, like a letter from real life dropped into a fantasy. He didn't open it yet. He just set it down with care, as if he respected what it contained too much to be dramatic. The room's nearby chatter dulled, curiosity pulling attention like gravity. Even the man in the suit paused, smile fading at the edges. Then Marisol saw the organizer's hand tremble, just once, before she hid it behind her clipboard. That tiny tremor told Marisol more than any confession could. Whatever was inside that envelope could rearrange the power in this room. It could save Marisol, or it could ruin her. Eli's voice came out calm, almost gentle, as he said, "The person who arrived early is coming this way." And the organizer's face turned pale like she'd seen a ghost. A hush gathered without anyone announcing it, like the room's lungs had decided to hold a single breath. Marisol turned toward the entrance again and saw a woman in a cream blazer walking with calm purpose. Not rushed, not smiling too wide. People made space for her the way they did for someone who belonged at the center. She didn't look rich in a loud way. She looked powerful in a quiet way, hair pinned neatly, eyes alert. The organizer straightened, as if a string had been pulled up her spine. The woman stopped near the banner and scanned the room like she was reading a report written in faces. When her gaze reached Marisol, it didn't slide away. It paused. Not pity, not judgment, just attention, steady as a hand on a shoulder. Marisol felt her pulse spike anyway, because attention could be dangerous too. The woman's eyes moved to Eli next, and something in her expression shifted, recognition that she tried to hide, failing by a fraction. Eli's jaw tightened like he'd expected that. "Miss Greer?" the organizer said brightly, rushing forward with a smile that looked stapled on. "You're early. We weren't expecting—" Ms. Greer lifted one hand, a small motion that ended the sentence mid-air. The organizer froze. The power difference was immediate and wordless, the kind Marisol had only seen in court when a judge silenced a lawyer with a glance. Ms. Greer's gaze moved down to the envelope on the table, and her face softened in a way that startled Marisol, like she'd seen something personal. Eli's fingers hovered near the envelope but didn't touch it. He looked at Ms. Greer, then down at the carpet, then back up, as if eye contact carried too many layers. "You came," he said quietly, and the simplicity of it sounded like a cracked door finally opening. Ms. Greer's voice was gentle but firm. "I came because my calendar changed," she replied, "and because someone called me and said there was a problem." Her eyes flicked briefly to the organizer's badge, then back to Eli. The man in the charcoal suit stepped in with a practiced chuckle. "Just a minor mix-up," he said. "We have an unregistered guest and a misunderstanding." He gestured vaguely toward Marisol, as if she were a spilled drink to be cleaned up. Marisol's stomach twisted. Ms. Greer didn't even look at him at first. She looked at Marisol's toddler, then at Marisol's face. "What's your name?" Ms. Greer asked, like names mattered. "Marisol," she answered, voice small but clear. Saying it out loud felt like stepping into light. Ms. Greer nodded once, as if filing it somewhere safe. "And your son?" Marisol hesitated, then said, "Ben." Ben blinked sleepily, fingers still curled around the blue cube. Ms. Greer's mouth softened at the corners. "Hi, Ben," she said, and it wasn't performative. It was human. Marisol felt something in her chest loosen, then tighten again with fear of hope. The organizer tried again, smiling too hard. "Marisol must have received an outdated invitation," she insisted. "This floor is reserved for partners. We can escort her to a more appropriate area." The phrase "more appropriate" was a knife disguised as velvet. Ms. Greer turned to the organizer fully now, eyes calm, voice calm, making the calm feel like a threat. "Show me the guest list," she said. The organizer blinked. "It's digital," she stammered. "I can—" Eli's hand moved, slow and deliberate, and he slid the envelope a few inches closer to Ms. Greer. The motion wasn't aggressive, it was decisive. Ms. Greer's gaze dropped to it again, and her throat moved as she swallowed. "Not yet," she murmured, almost to herself. Marisol caught that, "not yet," as if what was inside couldn't be unspoken once revealed. The curiosity gnawed at Marisol, sharp and bright. Why carry an envelope like a loaded truth if he didn't want to open it? Ms. Greer looked at Marisol again. "Who invited you?" she asked. Marisol's tongue felt heavy. She didn't want to betray anyone. She didn't want to sound desperate, but she also didn't want to lose the one thread that brought her here. "I was told someone from the Foundation wanted to meet," Marisol said carefully. "I got the invitation in the mail. It had my name. I didn't make it up." She hated that she had to defend reality like it was a lie. The charcoal suit man snorted softly. "People forge things all the time," he said, and the room gave him small, approving smiles. Ms. Greer's eyes finally moved to him, and the temperature dropped. "And people also abuse power all the time," she replied, voice still polite. The man's smile faltered. Marisol felt a small, fierce spark, relief mixed with disbelief. Someone was naming the thing out loud. That alone felt like a crack in a wall she'd been pushing for years. Eli's breathing sped again as more eyes turned toward him. Attention piled on his shoulders like weight. He rubbed his thumb along the envelope seam, a coping motion, and Marisol saw the effort it took for him to stay present. Ms. Greer noticed too. "Eli?" she said softly, and his name in her mouth sounded familiar, like a story that existed before tonight. The organizer's eyes widened at the name, then narrowed. Marisol's mind caught on it like a hook. Eli wasn't anonymous here. He had history. Miss Greer stepped closer to Eli, lowering her voice. "Is this about the audit?" she asked. The word audit made the organizer's face drain even more. The organizer shifted her clipboard as if hiding behind it. The charcoal suit man's posture stiffened. Marisol felt the invisible machinery behind the smiles, reports, emails, budgets, quiet deals, suddenly becoming visible. Eli didn't answer immediately. He looked at Marisol's son, then at Marisol, as if deciding whether to pull her into a storm she didn't choose. Marisol's phone vibrated in her pocket, a sudden buzz against her hip that felt too loud. She froze. The screen lit faintly through the fabric. For a second, her mind flashed to the worst possibility: the caseworker, the court, someone watching. She didn't take it out, but the vibration alone tightened her chest. Miss Greer noticed Marisol's flinch and asked gently, "Are you okay?" Marisol nodded too fast. "It's nothing," she lied, "because fear makes liars out of honest people." Miss Greer turned back to the organizer. "Pull up the digital list," she repeated slower. The organizer's hands trembled as she tapped her tablet, and Marisol saw the subtle panic. Not fear of being wrong, but fear of being caught. Eli leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing on the screen. Miss Greer's expression didn't change, but her pupils sharpened, taking in details. Then Eli's voice cut through, quiet but unmistakable. "You deleted her name." The organizer's head snapped up, eyes wide. The room didn't explode. It didn't gasp loudly. It did something worse. It went perfectly still, like everyone's brain had leaned forward at the same time. Marisol's skin prickled. Deleted. Not mistaken, not outdated. Deleted. The word rewrote the entire night. Miss Greer's gaze locked onto the organizer, and her voice stayed calm as she asked, "Why?" The organizer opened her mouth, but no sound came out, and Eli's fingers finally slid under the envelope seal again, as if the next truth was no longer optional. The organizer's lips parted, then pressed together, as if she could swallow the truth back down. Her eyes flicked to the charcoal suit man, searching for rescue, but he held still, suddenly careful. Miss Greer didn't raise her voice. That restraint made her authority feel heavier. "You deleted her name," she repeated, not as an accusation, but as a fact placed on the table. Marisol's knees softened. It hadn't been her imagination. Someone had chosen to erase her. Marisol's mind raced through motives the way fear always does, filling blanks with worst-case answers. Had someone called ahead and complained about her? Had her ex found out and sabotaged her? Or was she simply the kind of person people felt allowed to remove? She stared at the organizer and tried to see a human being, not a gate, but all she saw was someone who smiled while turning a lock. Ben stirred, sensing the shift, and Marisol rocked him gently, like motion could keep the world from tipping. Eli's fingers trembled at the envelope seal. His breathing went uneven, the sound of a body fighting overload in public. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them with a strange clarity, as if he'd reached the point where discomfort no longer mattered. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, voice thin but steady. "It was a decision." Ms. Greer watched him closely, not judging the tremor, not rushing him. Her patience felt like a handrail. The organizer's throat bobbed as she swallowed. The organizer forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "Eli, you're misunderstanding," she said, and Marisol noticed something. She used his first name too easily, like she'd practiced it. "The system auto-updates," she added quickly. "Sometimes records shift when we finalize seating." Ms. Greer's gaze didn't soften. "Show me the change log," she replied. The organizer blinked, fingers hovering over the tablet like they didn't know where honesty lived. The charcoal suit man cleared his throat, ready to steer the conversation away. Eli flinched at the throat clearing, then steadied himself by pressing his thumb along the envelope edge. "You don't want her here because she's not useful," he said, and the sentence sounded like it had been rehearsed in his mind for months. "And you don't want me near her because I notice patterns." The room's stillness deepened. Marisol felt every eye on them, but she couldn't look away. Eli wasn't just defending her, he was describing the room like he could see its wiring. Ms. Greer turned to Marisol again, voice low. "Marisol?" she asked. "Why were you invited?" The question hit Marisol like cold water. She hadn't fully let herself believe the invitation could help. She'd come because she was desperate, and desperation is a thing people punish. "I was told there might be a support grant," she admitted, cheeks burning. "Not money for nothing. Childcare help. Legal referrals. Something that shows stability." The last word tasted bitter. It was the word everyone demanded, never offering the tools to build it. The charcoal suit man smiled, as if Marisol had just confirmed a stereotype. "So this is about resources," he said smoothly. "This event is for strategic partners." Strategic, like compassion needed a business plan. Ms. Greer's eyes narrowed. "This foundation exists because families need support," she replied. "Strategic partners are not the purpose, they're the method." Her tone stayed polite, but the message landed like a verdict. Marisol felt a hot sting behind her eyes and forced it down, because crying in rooms like this became entertainment. Ben shifted again, waking more fully, and his face crumpled as if the tension had leaked into him. Marisol whispered, "Shh, baby," and tried to bounce him, but her arms were tiring. The organizer seized on the sound. "See," she said quickly, "this is exactly what we were trying to avoid." Avoid, not help. Avoid. Marisol's stomach twisted with shame, so sharp it felt physical, like her skin had turned inside out. She hated that her child's needs could be used as proof of her unworthiness. Eli's shoulders jerked as if struck, and for a moment it looked like he might retreat entirely. His eyes darted to the exit again, and his hand hovered near his keychain, where the earplugs hung. Marisol saw the fight in him, the instinct to flee versus the moral weight of staying. Ms. Greer noticed too. She shifted her stance slightly, positioning herself between Eli and the crowd, blocking some of the staring faces without making it obvious. It was a small kindness, but it mattered. Small kindnesses keep people from breaking. Eli inhaled slowly, then spoke with careful precision. "You keep saying 'we'," he said to the organizer. "But I heard what you said before Ms. Greer arrived." The organizer's eyes widened. "I didn't—" Eli didn't let her finish. "You said, 'People like you make donors uncomfortable,'" he repeated, and the words sounded uglier in the open air. Several guests shifted, suddenly aware of their own complicity. The charcoal suit man's jaw tightened, and he glanced around, checking who had heard. Marisol felt the sentence punch straight through her ribs. Hearing it repeated made it real in a new way, like a bruise pressed by a finger. Part of her wanted to deny it, to minimize, to protect herself from the humiliation. Another part of her, louder now, wanted the room to choke on it. Ms. Greer's face hardened, but her voice stayed controlled. "Did you say that?" she asked the organizer. The organizer's lips trembled, and for the first time she looked less like a gatekeeper and more like a cornered person. The organizer tried to pivot, eyes bright with forced sincerity. "I was trying to protect the event," she pleaded. "We have media here tonight. If something goes wrong—" Media. The word landed with a new kind of threat. Marisol's stomach dropped again. She hadn't thought about cameras. She imagined a headline twisting her into a cautionary tale. Irresponsible mother, disruptive guest. In the age of clips and captions, context died quickly. Ms. Greer turned her head slightly, scanning the room, and Marisol followed her gaze to a man holding a phone a little too high. Eli saw him too. His breathing hitched, and his fingers dug into the envelope like it was the only solid thing left. "That's why you did it," Eli said, voice tighter now. Not because she's wrong, because she's risky. Ms. Greer nodded once, as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. And you decided risk management means humiliation, she said to the organizer. The organizer's face flushed. The charcoal suit man stepped closer, voice low. We can handle this privately, he urged. Eli shook his head, a small motion that carried finality. Private is where it happens, he said. Private is how it survives. Then he slid a single sheet halfway out of the envelope, just enough for Ms. Greer to see a header and a few lines of text. Marisol couldn't read it from where she stood, but she saw Ms. Greer's eyes move quickly, then stop, as if she'd hit something shocking. Ms. Greer's hand lifted, hovering over the paper without touching it. Eli, she whispered, this is... Where did you get this? Eli didn't answer right away. He looked at Marisol, and the look held an apology she didn't yet understand, like he was about to pull her into a truth bigger than her invitation. Ben began to fuss again, and Marisol bounced him, heart racing, sensing the room teetering on a turning point. Eli's voice came out calm but heavy. It's the reason she was invited, he said, and it's the reason someone tried to erase her. Ms. Greer's eyes lifted to the organizer, sharp as glass. Stop recording, she said to the room, not loud, but impossible to ignore. The man with the phone hesitated, then lowered it halfway, pretending he'd only been checking a message. A few others followed suit, eyes dropping to plates they hadn't been eating from. Miss Greer's calm had the strange effect of making everyone aware of themselves, like a mirror suddenly raised. This is a family-focused foundation, she said, voice even. If the first instinct is to film someone's humiliation, then the problem isn't the guest. The words hung in the air, forcing people to sit with their own discomfort. Eli pulled the sheet the rest of the way out and placed it flat beside the envelope. The paper looked official, crisp typography, a heading that meant nothing to most of the room but made the organizer's shoulders tighten. Marisol leaned slightly, trying to see, but the letters blurred at her distance. Miss Greer read silently for a moment, then looked up, eyes narrowed in a way that felt surgical. This is an internal memo, she said, and it's not supposed to exist in public. Eli nodded once, a small movement that said, exactly. Marisol's mouth went dry. Internal memo meant hidden rules, decisions made behind closed doors that shaped lives without consent. She pictured her own file somewhere, labeled with words she never got to choose. The organizer tried to reclaim the narrative. That document is out of context, she said quickly. It's old. It's draft language. Ms. Greer's gaze didn't budge. Draft language still reveals intent, she replied. The charcoal suit man's smile was gone now, replaced by a tight managerial stare. Eli's hands trembled, and he tucked them briefly against his thighs, a grounding trick to keep from shaking apart. He spoke slowly, as if translating his thoughts into the safest possible order. The memo lists image risks, he said, and it names categories of people who should not be visible at flagship events. Marisol felt her heartbeat thud in her throat. Categories. The word made her feel less like a person and more like a statistic someone could delete. Eli swallowed. Single mothers with active custody disputes, he added, and Marisol's vision narrowed. Miss Greer's eyes snapped to Marisol, not with pity, but with something like outrage on her behalf. Marisol's grip tightened around Ben so hard she forced herself to loosen, afraid she'd wake him fully. The organizer's face turned a shade lighter, as if blood had been pulled away. We never implemented that, she insisted. Her voice rose, cracking at the edges. It was a proposal, risk team language. Eli looked at her and didn't blink. Then why was her name deleted? He asked softly. The charcoal suit man stepped in, trying to cut off the path before it reached anything irreversible. "We are not going to litigate policy in the ballroom," he said. "This is a fundraiser. We have press, sponsors." He spoke the words like a prayer. Press, sponsors, press, sponsors. Ms. Greer turned to him and held his gaze. "Then don't build policy that requires erasing people," she said. Her voice never sharpened, but the sentence hit like a door closing. The man's nostrils flared. Marisol felt Ben's little hand tugging at her necklace, an absent-minded search for comfort. She glanced down, and the blue cube was still in his fist. That tiny object felt like a symbol now, something simple that made a child calm in a room that demanded perfection. Marisol's mind flashed to another symbol, the court's idea of stability. She realized the cruel irony. This foundation claimed to support families, yet it feared families who looked like real life. Her shame began to shift into something steadier, heavier: refusal. Miss Greer crouched slightly, so her eyes were level with Marisol's, reducing the height gap without making a show of it. "Marisol," she said, "did someone from our foundation contact you directly?" Marisol hesitated, heart hammering. Saying yes might drag her into a bigger conflict. Saying no might make her look like she'd wandered in on a lie. "I got a call," she admitted. "A man. He said the foundation had a pilot program. He said I was exactly the kind of family they wanted to help." Her throat tightened on the phrase, exactly the kind. She'd believed it. She needed to. Eli's jaw clenched as if the words hurt him. He stared at the floor for a second, then looked up. "That call wasn't random," he said. Miss Greer's expression sharpened, like she'd been waiting for him to say it. The organizer's eyes widened again, and for the first time her control slipped into desperation. "Eli, stop!" she hissed, the politeness gone. "You don't understand what you're doing." Eli's voice stayed low. "I understand exactly," he replied, and the certainty in it made the room feel smaller. Ms. Greer stood and turned her body so she faced the organizer and the charcoal suit man at once. "Who authorized removing her?" she asked. It wasn't a question that expected a gentle answer. The organizer's eyes flicked to the man in charcoal, then away. That flick lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Marisol saw it too, and felt cold spread through her ribs. Decisions like this weren't made by one person with a headset. They were made by rooms of people who never had to meet the ones they erased. The charcoal suit man's voice softened into something almost kind. "We're protecting the mission," he said. "We can help families quietly without—" He gestured toward Marisol, toward Ben, toward the visible messiness of need. "Without creating distractions." Marisol stared at him, stunned by the ease of it. Quiet help. Invisible help. Help that asked you to be grateful off stage and silent forever. Ms. Greer's eyes flashed. "If your mission can't survive a mother and her child," she said, "then it's not a mission. It's marketing." Eli's breathing hitched again, and he reached into the envelope a second time. This time, he pulled out a small photograph, corners bent, as if it had been kept close for years. He held it up just enough for Miss Greer to see first. Her face changed instantly. Shock, then tenderness, then something like grief. Marisol couldn't see the image clearly, only a blur of a younger boy beside a woman in a work uniform. Eli's voice trembled, not from fear, but from memory. "This is why I'm here," he said. The organizer's hand rose to her mouth and she stopped herself, catching the gesture midair. The charcoal suit man took a small step back, as if he suddenly didn't want to be close to the truth. Ms. Greer reached out, not to take the photo, but to steady the air around it. "Eli," she said quietly, "you promised you wouldn't bring this into it." Eli's eyes remained on the photograph. "They brought it into it," he replied, and his gaze flicked toward Marisol. "By choosing her as collateral." Marisol's mind snapped to a terrifying possibility. She wasn't invited as help. She was invited as a test, a trap, a piece in a game she never agreed to play. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket, and this time the buzzing felt like a countdown. She didn't pull it out, but she knew deep down it wasn't nothing. Miss Greer noticed Marisol's panic and asked softly, "Who keeps calling you?" Marisol swallowed hard, eyes fixed on Eli's photograph, because the answer felt like it could break the last thread holding her life together. Marisol finally pulled her phone out, hands clumsy from adrenaline. The screen glowed with a name that made her stomach drop. Family Court Liaison. Not the caseworker, but close enough to make her blood run cold. She stared at it, feeling the room tilt. The call wasn't supposed to happen tonight. It wasn't scheduled. It felt timed, like someone had set it to ring right when she'd be most fragile. Her thumb hovered, and for a second she couldn't remember how to breathe. Ben fussed softly, sensing her panic, and his little fingers tightened around the cube like a lifeline. Marisol silenced the call, but the fear didn't silence with it. The phone immediately buzzed again, relentless. Ms. Greer watched, expression tightening. "Answer it," she said gently, not as pressure, as protection. Marisol shook her head once, tiny and desperate. "If I answer," she whispered, "they'll hear noise, they'll hear people, they'll write it down, they'll say I'm unstable." The word unstable tasted like rust. Eli's gaze snapped to the phone as if it were a siren. The organizer's eyes followed too, and Marisol saw something ugly there, satisfaction buried under concern. The charcoal suit man's mouth twitched, almost a smile, quickly hidden. Ms. Greer's voice stayed calm. "Put it on speaker," she offered. "Let them hear exactly what's happening." Marisol's chest tightened. That sounded like justice, but justice often demanded risks poor people couldn't afford. She looked down at Ben's face, sleepy and trusting, and felt the weight of choosing between survival and truth. Eli's hand hovered near the envelope again, then stopped. He looked like he wanted to disappear, but he didn't move. His eyes flicked to the photograph, then to Marisol. "They weaponize nerves," he said quietly, as if naming it could reduce its power. "They wait until your body betrays you." Marisol felt seen in a way that was almost painful. She'd always blamed herself for shaking, for crying, for freezing. No one had ever said it out loud. The system counts your stress as evidence against you. The phone buzzed a third time, and Marisol's pulse spiked with it. Her brain did what brains do under threat. It narrowed the world to one decision: answer or don't, fight or flee. Ms. Greer's hand lifted slightly, not touching, offering presence. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. Marisol swallowed hard and hit accept, then speaker, before she could change her mind. The sudden quiet that followed felt like stepping onto a stage with no script. A clipped male voice filled the air, professional and rehearsed. "Ms. Reyes," he said, pronouncing her name carefully. "This is Mr. Harlan from the liaison office. We attempted to reach you earlier." Marisol's throat tightened. "Hi," she managed. Her voice sounded smaller through the speaker, like it belonged to someone younger. "We received a report," Mr. Harlan continued, "that you may be attending an event that conflicts with your agreed-upon parenting plan. Can you confirm your location?" "Report." The word hit like a stone. Marisol's eyes flew to the organizer, and the organizer's face was a practiced mask again. Ms. Greer's expression darkened. Eli's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. Marisol tried to keep her voice steady, remembering every warning about tone, about attitude, about appearing cooperative. "I'm at a foundation banquet," she said carefully. "I have my son with me. He's safe." Mr. Harlan paused for half a beat, then asked, "Is there alcohol being served around the child?" The question was a trap disguised as concern. Marisol's cheeks burned. She could smell champagne in the air, and suddenly the room's luxury felt like danger. "There are drinks," she admitted, "but no one is—" Mr. Harlan cut in, voice still calm. "Ma'am, I need simple answers. Yes or no." Marisol's vision narrowed. Simple answers were never simple for people whose lives were judged in snapshots. She swallowed. "Yes," she said. The word hung there, heavy, misinterpreted by design. The organizer's eyes flicked toward the charcoal suit man again, quick and satisfied. Ms. Greer leaned closer to the phone, voice polite, controlled. "Mr. Harlan," she said, "this is Cynthia Greer. I'm the Foundation's compliance chair. I can confirm the child is safe, and I can also confirm this call appears to be prompted by an internal interference." A silence. Then Mr. Harlan's tone shifted, cautious. "Ms. Greer," he said, "we weren't aware of your presence." Ms. Greer's eyes didn't leave the organizer. "You weren't meant to be," she replied softly. The room felt suddenly colder. Mr. Harlan cleared his throat. "Our duty is to document potential concerns," he said. "We were informed the mother may be agitated, possibly creating a disturbance." Marisol felt her stomach drop. Agitated, disturbance. Those words could live in a report like stains that never washed out. Eli's breathing hitched, and he looked like he might implode from the unfairness. Marisol wanted to shout that she was agitated because people were humiliating her, but she knew anger could be used against her too. That was the cage. React, and you prove them right. Stay quiet, and you disappear. Eli spoke for the first time into the call, voice steady but thin. "She is agitated because you called her during a public humiliation," he said, words precise like points on a map. "And because someone here deliberately deleted her name from the guest list to provoke this moment." Another silence, longer. "And who are you?" Mr. Harlan asked, the caution thickening. Eli hesitated, the room watching his face, waiting for a label to dismiss him with. His lips parted, then closed, then parted again, like his brain was negotiating the safest truth. Ms. Greer answered before Eli could, and her words changed the temperature of everything. "He is Eli Mercer," she said, voice clear, "the founder's son and the primary benefactor behind this event." Chairs seemed to stop moving. Conversations fully died. Even the servers froze mid-step, trays held like statues. Mr. Harlan's voice went careful, suddenly respectful. "Understood," he said. "We will note that. Ms. Reyes, do you have any immediate safety concerns?" Marisol's eyes filled, not from weakness, but from the shock of being protected by power for once. The organizer's face drained of color. The charcoal suit man's posture stiffened, like a man realizing his footing was gone. Eli's shoulders sagged slightly, as if saying his name out loud cost him something. Marisol stared at Eli, mind spinning. Benefactor. Founder's son. A man who stood alone by a plant with a fidget cube in his pocket, treated like a nuisance by the same people who smiled under his banner. Eli looked at Marisol like he was bracing for her judgment, as if his identity could feel like another betrayal. Ms. Greer guided the call to an end with calm efficiency, promising follow-up, requesting written documentation, locking the liaison office into accountability. When the speaker clicked off, the silence didn't lift. It deepened. The room had heard too much to pretend it hadn't. Eli stared at the envelope, then at the photograph, then at the organizer, and his voice came out almost gentle. "Now," he said, "everyone can see what you do when you think no one important is watching." The organizer's lips trembled, and Marisol sensed the next move wouldn't be loud, but it would be final. Eli didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence he had created did the work for him, stretching across the ballroom like a sheet pulled tight. He reached into the envelope and removed 2 more pages, placing them beside the memo with the care of someone setting down evidence, not weapons. Ms. Greer watched his hands, ready to step in if he spiraled. But Eli moved with a steady ritual, thumb smoothing paper edges, as if order on the table could quiet the chaos in his body. Marisol held Ben close and felt for once that the room had to hold her too. "This isn't about revenge," Eli said, eyes still on the pages. "It's about reality." He tapped a line with his fingertip, then looked up, scanning faces that had avoided looking at him minutes ago. "I asked for a foundation that helps families without testing their worthiness in public," he continued. "Some of you turned that into a stage where only polished suffering is allowed." The words landed in people's chests because they recognized themselves in them. A few donors shifted uncomfortably, not guilty enough to apologize, but no longer able to laugh. Ms. Greer lifted one page and read a paragraph aloud, voice calm, precise. It listed visibility risk scenarios and included a recommendation to screen guests with active legal disputes to avoid reputational exposure. The language sounded sterile, but Marisol heard the translation. "Hide the women who might cry. Hide the men who might stim. Hide the children who might need something. Hide anything that reminds rich rooms of how fragile life is." The organizer's breathing became shallow, eyes darting to exits as if she could walk away from words printed in ink. The charcoal suit man stepped forward, palms open, like he was soothing a misunderstanding between adults. "We can discuss policy later," he said, voice low. "Eli, this is not the right venue." Eli's gaze fixed on him, and Marisol saw something in Eli's eyes that felt like years of swallowing and finally refusing. "This is the exact venue," Eli replied, "because this is where you perform compassion." The man's expression tightened. "You're putting donors in an uncomfortable position." Eli nodded once. "Good," he said, and the single syllable made the room shiver. Ben began to fuss again, overwhelmed by the tension. Marisol bounced him gently, whispering comfort, and felt the familiar panic rising. What if the child's noise becomes the excuse again? Before the fear could fully bloom, Ms. Greer signaled a server with a small motion. The server approached carefully, eyes kind, and offered a chair near the front and a glass of water, not as charity, but as normal courtesy. The simple act pierced Marisol more deeply than any speech. Her nervous system didn't know how to process respect without conditions. The organizer tried one last pivot, voice trembling into righteousness. "We were protecting Eli," she blurted. "He doesn't do well with crowds. He doesn't do well with unpredictability." She said it like she was defending him, but it sounded like she was using him. Eli's shoulders stiffened, and for a moment his face flashed with a pain so personal it made Marisol look away. Ms. Greer's gaze turned sharp. "Do not speak for him," she said, "especially not while you're harming others in his name." Eli inhaled slowly, then spoke with careful honesty, the kind that costs. "They've protected me by hiding me," he said. "They call it kindness. It's control." He looked at Marisol's son, then back to Marisol, as if anchoring himself in something real. "I get overwhelmed," he admitted. "But I'm still a person, and she's still a person. Your comfort is not the metric of our right to exist here." The sentence wasn't dramatic. It was clean, inevitable truth. Marisol felt tears rise, not because she was weak, but because she'd been starving for someone to say it. Ms. Greer turned toward the crowd and raised her voice just enough to reach the far tables. "This event continues," she announced, "but the standards change right now." She nodded to a staff member near the stage. "Replace the organizer, immediately." The organizer's face crumpled, disbelief and panic colliding. The charcoal suit man stepped in, urgent. "Cynthia, that's not procedure," he protested. Ms. Greer didn't flinch. "Procedure is what we use to avoid ethics," she replied, and the man went quiet like someone had pulled a plug. The organizer's hands fluttered near her clipboard, a trapped bird motion. "You can't do this," she whispered, more to the room than to Miss Greer, hoping for sympathy. But the room was watching Eli now, and watching the papers, and realizing their laughter had been part of a system. One donor coughed and looked away. Another checked his phone, suddenly desperate for distance. Shame moved through the space invisibly, contagious in a way kindness rarely got to be. Marisol felt a strange power in that. The room was finally uncomfortable for the right reasons. Eli reached for the photograph again, holding it between two fingers. "This woman," he said, voice softening, "worked night shifts in this same hotel when I was a kid." Marisol's breath caught. Eli's eyes flicked to her face, and she saw hesitation there, as if he feared the next sentence would be too much. "She saved me when nobody here would have looked twice," he continued. "She taught me a rule. When you see someone being pushed out, you step toward them." He paused, swallowing hard. "That woman was your mother." Marisol went still, as if the words had turned her to stone. Her mind flashed through half-remembered stories. Her mother coming home exhausted, feet swollen, talking about fancy people and how kindness was rare in fancy places. She'd never mentioned saving anyone. She'd never mentioned a boy. Marisol's chest tightened with grief and pride colliding, a chemical storm that made her hands shake. "My mother worked here," Marisol whispered, almost inaudible. Eli nodded, eyes glossy but controlled. "And she asked one thing of me," he said. "Don't let people like her become invisible." Miss Greer stepped beside Eli, voice gentler now. "That's why the pilot program exists," she said, looking at Marisol. "Not as a headline, as repair." Marisol's mind tried to protect itself by doubting, because hope had betrayed her before. "Then why was I erased?" she asked, the question ripping out of her. The charcoal suit man looked away. The organizer's face twisted, and for the first time she looked less like a villain and more like a person caught in a cruel machine. "Because you were proof," Eli said quietly, "and they didn't want proof walking in the door." Ms. Greer turned to the staff again. "Bring a microphone," she said. A staff member hurried, eyes wide. The room tensed, anticipating a speech, a scandal, a viral moment. Marisol's stomach dropped. Public moments could still turn on her. Eli took the microphone when it arrived, holding it too close at first, then adjusting like he'd rehearsed this in his head and hated every version. He looked out at the faces, donors, staff, guests, then down at Marisol and Ben. His voice came out steady, almost quiet, yet it filled the room. "If you're here to feel generous," Eli said, "then start by facing what you just watched." He pointed not at Marisol, but at the empty space that had been made for her to disappear into. "You saw a mother being treated like a threat. You saw an autistic man treated like a malfunction. You saw staff call it standards." His gaze swept the room like a slow light. "Tonight, the Foundation will fund support openly, and the first family we support will not be hidden. She will be welcomed. She will be resourced, and anyone who can't tolerate that can leave." The room stayed silent, not because it was forced, but because no one knew how to argue with moral clarity. Marisol felt her knees wobble, and she sat in the chair the server had offered, Ben heavy and warm against her chest. Her mind replayed the cruelty, then replayed the reversal, trying to integrate a world where the powerful didn't automatically win. Eli handed the microphone back without looking for applause. He stepped closer to Marisol, voice low, meant only for her. "The pilot program includes legal advocacy," he said. "Not a referral. Representation." Marisol's breath hitched because the word representation was the difference between begging and being protected. Ms. Greer addressed the room again, setting boundaries, naming accountability, promising an investigation without turning it into theater. Yet the biggest shift had already happened inside Marisol. Her shame had been exposed to daylight and couldn't survive the way it used to. She looked at Eli, this man who had been treated like an inconvenience under his own banner, and saw how his pain had taught him precision rather than bitterness. Eli met her gaze briefly, and the look carried a quiet question. Would she let herself be helped without feeling like she owed her dignity in exchange? As guests slowly returned to their seats, the room's noise came back altered, lower, cautious, almost reverent. But Marisol's phone sat on her lap like a sleeping animal that might wake again. The liaison office could still write its report. The internet could still twist a clip. Her custody case could still go wrong. Ms. Greer leaned in and murmured, "We can put something in writing tonight." And Eli added, barely audible, "And there's one more thing in the envelope you haven't seen." Marisol's eyes dropped to the papers on the table, heart thudding, because she suddenly sensed the final truth wasn't about the foundation at all. If Marisol's struggle and Eli's quiet courage hit something inside you, if you've ever felt judged in a room where you were just trying to survive, don't let this story end in silence. Hit the like button so more people who feel invisible can find this. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that confront prejudice and protect human dignity. And write in the comments below, have you ever been pushed out of a place you had every right to be? And what would you have done in Marisol's position?